Okay, 1985 was pretty much the peak, and the peak of all peaks of fantasy films. You had, at the time, you had Legend, you had the Ewoks movie, TV movie, Battle of Endor, you had Lady Hawk, you had Red Sonja came out, which is a major flop. And you had a movie with Flesh and Blood, Sorts of Castles and everything. And here you get a mix in the mix and kind of get lost out as Black Cauldron.
Yeah, Black Cauldron is the kind of movie that, like The Room from Tommy Wiseau, the behind-the-scenes story of the film is almost more captivating than the movie itself. Yeah. All of the things that happened with this movie, from the time it was optioned in 1971 from writer Lloyd Alexander.
And they start working on 1980.
Exactly. Yeah. The story is just so crazy about this movie, and I know this was my first time watching, and I think it was yours as well, right?
Yeah, this is my sit down from beginning to end to watch it, because I've only seen little pieces of it. So, yeah. It's an Disney animation film that gets lost in the whole sci-fi fantasy, because like 85, we got bombarded with sci-fi fantasies, and forget, we also were buying He-Man animating the cartoon and the action figures and all that stuff. So, in the world of fantasy in 1985, we're going to talk about the one animation film that gets lost.
Yeah, definitely. The movie Disney tried to bury. Black Cauldron today on Kyle and Nick on Film. Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from Goethe Film Reviews.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and you already know I'm going to tell you, like and subscribe, tell your friends, and tell everybody about the show. We appreciate it. Thank you for all the loyal listeners and watchers who continue watching the program. You can reach out to us on Instagram, or you can follow us on Twitter as well. We also got some great deals for our Patreon, so check those down below. If you want to comment and know about Black Cauldron and all that stuff, you know what they need to do. You can reach out to that way. Black Cauldron, Disney movie, 1985.
Absolutely. So it's set in the land of Prydain. A young boy named Terran, protector of a magical pig named Henwin, teams up with a ragtag group to find the Black Cauldron in order to rescue Henwin when it's kidnapped by the frightening and all-powerful Horned King. Yeah, so the Black Cauldron really was the movie Disney tried to get rid of. It made it in 1985, and then it disappeared, I think, within 2 weeks of being in the theaters. It really just kind of
I don't remember it being in theaters when I was a kid.
Yeah, and there was even an attempt to release a heavily altered, lighter version of it in 1990 called Terran and the Magic Cauldron, based on the German poster and German title of the film. But then that kind of fell apart because test screenings for the lighter version were even worse than test screenings for the darker version. And the film didn't hit home video until 1997, when it was released as part of Disney's Masterpiece Collection.
And if you were around in 1985, you know, it was a big, even though we have good movies, the summer blockbusters, there was none. Mm-hmm. In fact, Red Sonja was supposed to be, and it was a major flop. So a lot of the sword and sorcerers movies were getting hit, and of course Disney's going to come up with this one, and it's almost like we already have enough of this, and they already knew they were going to probably lose money with this because it's just a bombardment. For Black Cauldron, oh my God, is this Lord of the Rings? It feels like Lord of the Rings.
People have compared the original source material, The Chronicles of Prydain, to Lord of the Rings in a very kind of respectful way. Like, of course, it's never going to be as good as Tolkien, but Lloyd Alexander's 5-book series is pretty much well loved amongst its fans, and this is an adaptation of the first 2 books. Heavily altered, I gotta say, but optioned in 1971. The work on it began, I think, in 1975, and it was kind of this constant fight between the remaining members of the 9 old men from Disney's animators, the first generation of new ones, the second generation of animators, and the third generation, who were all these Cal Arts people. We're all kind of trying to make something that was going to elevate Disney beyond what they had been, try to make something unique and kind of change the table for animation. And then the bigwigs got involved and kind of messed it up, and then those guys got replaced, and new bigwigs came in and tried to mess it up a little bit, and we ended up with a film that has that potential, has that ambition, but I don't feel ever really rises to where it needs to be.
No, and like you said, through all that, it got caught up with the transitions of Disney, and it's a little bit darker than even you see a Disney movie now. So even though the recuts and everything of how dramatic and dark, and really has a dark tone, a dark theme to it, that you're not really prepared for a Disney movie.
The Horned King is terrifying.
Yeah, I think it's parents that have 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds would be hesitant to go to theater to see this.
Yeah, well, I used to think, before seeing this film, I used to think that Fantasia was the creepiest of all the Disney animated films, because some of the stuff that happens in Fantasia is just incredibly unusual, thought-provoking, weird, and a little frightening at times. I think the Horned King is probably the scariest Disney creation to ever come out.
Well, what I like about this movie, and this is the first time seeing it, is you get the names right away. Get away from the window, Terran.
I have to protect Henwin.
Yeah, I gotta protect Henwin. Okay, so like when the first two lines of dialogue, you get the names out of it.
Yeah,
it's great. I love it. And of course, you have a magical pig.
That's the Disney part. That's the magic pig part.
Or a talking furry guy. He was.
Oh yeah. Is it? Let's see. Gurgi,
which is kind of like a fluffy, nice version of Gollum.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man, that has to be some portion of translation is Gurgi influenced Andy Serkis to play Gollum in that way, because it's not a full Gollum. It's like a diet Gollum.
Disney loves, for some reason, the prop of an apple.
Mm-hmm.
They've been using that for years, even though some stories tell you have to use it. But they love using some prop of an apple, introducing it as some.
Well, and perhaps that's maybe in like the back of their heads as they were working on this film, because it was constantly referred to as the next Snow White. Like it was going to be the next film that was going to change the landscape of.
And Snow White's kind of dark, but
yeah.
It doesn't really go this terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the idea was initially to use the original like drawings from the books as inspiration to the concept art. And the concept art, they wanted to do something a little bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but a little bit less Disney-fied than what they'd had before. And it constantly went through these changes of like how Disney do we want them, how like realistic and how like well defined do we want them. And finally they took the information to one of the 9 old men who had since I think retired, and he kind of did concept work, but they never gave him the concept work that they had done. So he made Disney versions of the characters.
Which they are.
Yeah, and so much so that
Disney drawn.
they said Terran kind of looked a little bit like Mowgli. You know, where it's like all these characters looked like other people that were supposed to be. In fact, is it Dalbar?
Yeah.
Dalbar, who they said
Goldman.
actually looked like Roger from 101 Dalmatians, had to be rechanged because he looked like a bald version of Roger.
So yeah, it has that. Okay, like a lot of things that you see in a Disney film, the look and feel of it. But if you show it to somebody, you're like, oh my god, is this a Disney movie? Are you a little bit surprised?
Mm-hmm.
And you get a lot of elements of Lord of the Rings. I'm surprised that I'm like every time first time watching this, like, oh my god, this is like a Lord of the Rings lift.
Yep.
Even though this is borrowed from an old Welsh tale, but you have the same kind of going directions of a reluctant hero that dreams of fantasy and all that sword fighting. Which, my god, we got that a lot in the mid 80s of just the same kind of formula over and over and over again.
Well, and it reminded me a bit of the Lord of the Rings animated film. Just not in terms of its rotoscoping, because they didn't use that, but in terms of like they used elements of CGI in the film, so it has like a different texture than normal animation.
Isn't the first one Disney movie that has?
It's the first Disney film that was animated to utilize a CG in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, it was so successful in the eyes of the creators that they would go on to actually hire the same CG team to work on The Great Mouse Detective. So basically, everybody who left this project went to The Great Mouse Detective. So some of that too was we worked on the CG. Great, we'll use on the Great Mouse
Go
Detective.
to the next office.
But they also had John Hurt playing the Horned King and John Huston playing the narrator, who both appeared in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So
provide great. I like the great. Well, isn't John Hurt the bad guy?
John Hurt's the bad guy in this film, and I think, is he Aragorn in Lord of the Rings? I think so.
Okay.
But it's nice to have, like, again, these are two guys who have a lot of gravitas in the business, especially at this time. So to utilize them in your voice cast does lift those characters up a little bit, and it kind of gives them that Lord of the Rings flavor, because they're not bright and shiny characters. I mean, of course, Houston is the narrator, so he's not a character at all. But
of course, we have a Disney movie, so we have a Disney princess in this movie, and she needs to be, of course, rescued. We have what's her name?
Eilonwy? I can't say it right. It's one of the few names that I just can't even try to get right, but I will.
And I think her voiceover, the person who did voiceover, is no longer with us. But it's very much this Disney princess, and she's the fairest and the brightly colored one, and she's gonna give out some exposition. But
I feel like each character in this film, and I haven't read Prydain, so I don't know. I added this to my read list because I'm really interested in this book series. But it does feel like each of these characters is maybe a little too archetypal of Disney lore, and that includes even like we talked about Dalbar being kind of like the blundering sidekick fool who's there. We have our Disney princess. We have We have all these kind of characters who play into that. Gurky, of course, being the cute character, Henwin the pig, and then even like Phil Fondacaro, who I adore as a voice worker and as a performer, playing like the creeper guy who's kind of coming through there too, and he kind of has an Iago-ness to him.
Yeah, and I don't know. And they have a lot of like the rescue, you have like a magical sword, just like He-Man. So, like I said, it's a lot of the same tropes that we got bunch in the 80s, and even though this film kind of misses the fire, but it's just lost in the mix of all those movies that came out at the same time.
And this film, for me, actually has my biggest criticism of it is a criticism that I gave to some DC movies. I gave this criticism to Batman vs. Superman and the Suicide Squad, is that it's not the problem of the tone. Everyone, all the people behind the scenes said the problem with these films was the tone. They're too dark. No, the elements of the Black Cauldron that worked were the dark parts.
I agree.
The parts that didn't work were the Disney parts. I've seen some of the footage actually. I think it's called Netherworld or Yesterworld. I'll put the link in the comments. But there was another group of people who kind of did a breakdown of the backstory and actually got their hands on several of the cut scenes and cut frames from the original cut of the film. And the dark stuff is really cool. There's a moment where the Horn King gets like burned with acid, and like you can see like the skull is kind of like tearing apart a little bit. Like that stuff looks amazing. And it's got that high fantasy level to it. And I also think we view our children as not being able to handle stuff like this movie. And I'll tell you right now, if I were a kid when this movie had come out, I would be dragging my parents to the theater to see it. And at no point would I have been horrified, because I saw some hardcore stuff.
Oh my god,
I turned out okay.
I was 5 years old, and we all fast forward to the Raiders of the Lost Ark melting face.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we all love that. And like I said, usually when you're cut for, we don't want to show kids that, it goes even darker. They had the original Frankenstein, they had to like cut scenes of the little girl where you cut it looks more terrifying rather than showing what was in the movie.
Yeah, the original movie showing it. It's more terrifying.
So like the monster in the original Frankenstein movie, he just, as a reflex, throws her in the water. Where in the movie, they cut that. So you don't know what happened to the daughter and you never seen her again. Your mind's like, oh my god, he killed her. So a lot of times when you cut things that think were going to be too dark, it makes it even problematic.
It's a flip side of why people like Jaws works really well. Is because you don't show the monster, you try to hide it, you try to like make it elusive and build up.
They try to do this
when it finally shows up. In this film, that doesn't work because you kind of make it more horrifying when your goal was apparently to make it less horrifying.
Right, you show the beginning of the movie, it's all cute and farm and prairie and raising animals, and you're like, well, what's wrong with this? And then it goes the contrast. I think if you start right away of selling the exposition that this is dark, it has a dark tone, and then introduce the whimsical, then you have a little bit of balance. But if you're just going to go light, fluff, and all the severity of the dark, then it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of like, Willow is a dark movie.
It is.
The Never-Ending Story is a dark movie.
All those fleshy monsters.
Legend is a dark movie. Labyrinth is a dark movie.
My god, the bad guy in Legend is darkness, for God's sake.
Literally dark movie. Like,
that came out the same time as Black Cauldron.
Yeah, and like look at it in terms of this. Your problem is not your darkness. Your problem is that you didn't know what kind of a movie you wanted to make. Right. You wanted to have the ambition to make something that was going to rise above. And I do think if Disney had made this film as intended, as a high fantasy with some dark elements, they might have turned away some of the kids, but they might have brought in some of the adults.
But just tell everybody you gotta be older than 5. Yeah.
And I mean, having the film rated PG, that did mean something. There were parental groups who said, oh my goodness, this movie is PG. Like, can I bring my kid to it still? That was a thing. Like, that was a big part of this film, being the first Disney animated film to be PG. That did matter to parent groups. Then they could have done the research. This is what we have rating systems for, as much as I don't like the rating systems.
And I have to say, how they drew the castles and the dungeons and everything, it looks great.
It looks fantastic.
It does.
I think if they had breathed some life into these animators and told them to go for it, told them to really try their best to do something unique and different,
rather than handcuff one hand and draw the other.
They left. They let one of their animators go, a man who has become more famous since his time on Black Cauldron, named Tim Burton. He was an animator and a concept artist for this film, was let go because they didn't like the way his concept artist stuff worked, And you know what's crazy is when this film finally came out years after he left the project, it was beaten at the box office by a certain movie called Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which directed by Tim Burton. So
it's a little bit dark too.
It's dark. It's creepy. And I almost went out of my head to say
that's a deceiving point where you advertise like Pee Wee Herman's supposed to be fun, but there are some dark things to that.
Yeah.
And like I said, you don't have to do tone and theme don't have to go together.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a dark tone and a light theme. You can have a light theme and a dark tone. They don't have to go together, DC. And I think if you had a dark tone to this movie with a light theme, you could sell this massively.
Yeah, and I think Disney took the wrong reaction from this film in that
they thought tone and theme have to be the
this
same.
film was beaten at the box office, and probably most people would consider the most egregious beatdown it had at the box office was that it lost at the box office to the Care Bears movie. And Disney took that to mean that people don't want to have dark animated movies, they want Care Bears. And so they kind of like pushed their elements into like trying to liven up and be the more lighthearted films. And when they didn't understand that the parts that we really love about these movies are those parts that were taken out of this movie.
You need, and like we said, you and I have been in the writers' workshops and everything, you really need a good villain.
Mm-hmm.
Good movies have really good villains. They don't have to be.
And this one was neutered.
Yeah, and this one, the Horned King, is kind of, it's neutered. You want to have, Ghostbusters had a really good villain, for God's sakes.
But the Horned King has elements of a great villain, I think, and I think because, again, he was such a terrifying villain, those are the parts that were cut. There were so many cool parts with the Army of the Dead where they were actually going to utilize CG to have them rising out of the ground, and their goal was to have it look like this army was in the audience with you. That would have been incredible to do, but instead they decided it's too expensive and we can't do anything that dark. And like, let's look at the next couple films that came out from Disney that created, I guess, the modern Disney Renaissance, which was The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and The Lion King. Some of the best parts about those films are the darker parts. Yeah. Ursula is terrifying.
Well, have you ever read the original Little Mermaid?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
They Disneyfied those films, but they still had the parts that we love the most are the dark parts. I think Jafar is terrifying in Aladdin. He scared the crap out of me as a kid, and the parts where he becomes the genie and he becomes all powerful, that's terrifying to me. Like, as a child, I remember being really disturbed by that, and also wanting to watch it again.
So, yeah, and after, I think this kind of ignored. I don't remember this movie being discussed in the 90s, but now I think a lot of people your age have discovered this. Like, nobody's told me about this movie, and it's like a new discovery of a film that Disney made that you never even heard about. And I think it's got a lot of attraction, a lot of people talking about it.
Yeah, it's because of that fact that it wasn't available for home purchase for 12 years after it came out. Yeah. And then it came out in a limited run VHS that was under the Disney Masterpiece line, which is funny because you didn't care enough about the movie to release it years ago. And the film had a limited run, but it was a very high seller on VHS. And what's weird too is the Blu-ray for this movie, you can't get in a Target. You have to be a part of Disney's movie rewards to get the Blu-ray for this movie.
Well,
it's exclusive to that, so they don't even trust the film now to do well. I think, if I may be wrong,
it's on Disney's stream service.
It's on there now, but I think it showed up this year. I don't think this was on the streaming service last year. I remember reading someplace that it showed up on 2021.
I think you're right.
To the service.
So that's the first thing I looked for was this movie.
Yeah. I was looking for this movie, and I looked for the Black Hole.
And I got the Black Hole, and I was like, no, what about Black Cauldron? That's another movie we should create, Black Hole. Yeah.
We'll get there, yeah.
We'll get there. Yeah. So,
but I agree, yeah.
I think a lot of things that Disney was trying to fight. You're right. We're getting down to the point that Disney's trying to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it in there, and just explain. Hey, yeah, it's a dark film. Well, the villain's dark, right? Yeah, you're gonna have to fight that and defeat that, and it's gonna be really kind of nasty. And kids like gooey stuff. And
adult kids like the same stuff because whenever there was a light part of the movie, I was kind of relaxed back like this, and whenever that Horned King showed up, I was like, "What's going on?" Yeah. Like I was really into that excitement part of it,
and it looks good. It still looks good, even though a lot of parts are Disney-fied, as you like to say. Yeah.
But I think that there's that 80s aging to the animation because we don't see that kind of animation anymore. It started to kind of fizzle out in the 90s when Toy Story became a thing. So this was in the finale of that 2D hand-drawn animation for Disney especially, and it kind of it's got that aged film feel. I think it was initially was planned to be in 70 millimeter because they wanted it to have that I think
They
the
really
last
wanna go
70
that
millimeter
top
film was
scope, yeah.
was Sleeping Beauty for Disney. So they really wanted to go with that like wider lens, that really wide angle battle sequence kind of a film stock, and that would have worked just well. Like the film, they went into it with the best of intentions, and then you get Michael Eisner and you get Jeffrey Katzenberg, who wanted to cut 10 minutes from a 90-minute movie. That would have been better. And Katzenberg went as far as he was going to start physically cutting the movie together himself. He'd never done that before, but he was about to do it, and Eisner had to step in and pull him back out. Yeah. And it was this war of worlds. We're lucky, actually, that the financial failure of the Black Cauldron paved the way, because Katzenberg actually said afterwards in the interview, I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to do better. I'm not leaving this company. And because of him and a few other people like learning from the mistakes of the Black Cauldron is when we got the renaissance of The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and The Lion King.
So they can go a little bit darker with your stories and kind of stick with the tone, and you can have a light tone and a dark theme. Yeah, it's a good point with writers. I mean, always stick with what you do. I mean, if you went ugly with this and you really went out with it, I think initially you probably won't get the reaction. Initially, you probably wouldn't make money, but you have a greater success, a greater payoff now. And still, it's an enjoyable movie to watch.
Yeah, I still had fun watching, and I think a lot of people might take from this interview that we hated this movie. I don't think that's the case at all.
No,
I enjoyed the movie immensely. It just felt to me like a movie that could have been so much more. And that
just feels handcuffed, and of course, he explained the reason why.
Yep, and every time they get to those parts, like when Taran ends up facing off against the Horned King or with this creeper creature. Those are the kinds of things where it's like, ooh,
yeah, let's see it. Right. My God, we've been growing up with Skeletor and E-Man. Let's see the Skull Guy get. Yeah, let's see it. Yeah. So, have you seen Black Cauldron?
Yeah, let us know in the comment section down below your thoughts on the film. Like we said, it's available on Disney Plus right now. You can purchase it digitally, or if you're part of the Disney Movie Rewards group, you can purchase the Blu-ray occasionally. I don't think it's currently open for purchase, so maybe we missed our chance. But it is out there, it is available, and you can check it out and let us know your thoughts. Where does it sit in the pantheon of Disney films? Is it your favorite? I know a lot of people actually do adore this movie, and they say it's like their favorite.
I think if you
Disney
like
movie.
Lord of the Rings, you like that stuff, even though it's a little bit handcuffed. There's a payoff.
Yeah. And I think for me, I was comparing it to other films that I expected it to be, and it was not what I expected. So I'm excited to go back to the film and kind of revisit it later on and see how it plays to that.
I'm ready to go back and not just have to take notes and push pause and just enjoy it.
So let us know in the comments your thoughts on the film below. Oh, here's the thing: is it your favorite Ted Berman and Richard Rich movie? It's not mine, because I really like The Fox and the Hound. But let us know, and then don't forget too, you can like, subscribe, check out that Patreon too. Take a look. It's as cheap as $1 a month. And while doing that, you're supporting the channel and independent content creators like us.
Yeah, we're cheap.
Yeah.
You can find my podcast, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts where I interview local independent filmmakers from the Twin Cities area.
Perfect. And you can check out my film reviews, over 1,000 of them, on goatfilmreviews.com.